So now I'm very honored to introduce the next speaker. She's Miriam Dalli. She's a member of the European Parliament. As you know, EPTRI was willing to organize this stakeholder roundtable at the European Parliament, but due to the pandemic emergency, this was not possible. And in the meantime, we are also working to increase awareness about pediatric research, work with stakeholders, and trying to create a network of parliamentary advocates for pediatrics. And Miriam is a member of the European Parliament who first, between others, with a very strong and convincing attitude to promote, to take the lead maybe of this network, accepted to participate to this roundtable. And so Miriam, please, the ground is yours for your presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, thank you for that introduction. It's true that because of the pandemic, it's very difficult to actually meet in person, but at least we can meet online, and it's so good to understand also these different points of views and also the good work that is currently being made. As a parliamentarian, I will speak from the policy point of view, obviously, but I'm interested to listen to what the experts have to say. My focus will be primarily on the access to medicines, because access to medicines is currently one of the most important issues under the spotlight, also due to the coronavirus pandemic. However, the importance of this topic goes far beyond the shortage of drugs because of the pandemic. Proper access to the medication for all conditions, including rare diseases and also pediatric cancer, has been a problem for years in the European Union. Just to get an idea of the extent of the problem, we currently have around 30 million patients across the Union in all the different member states that find it difficult to access medication, particularly for rare diseases. And these people include some of our most vulnerable citizens, including young children and cancer patients. I will share with you the real story of young patients and their families, because coming from Malta means that I understand the realities of a small market, about which certain big companies might not even be interested to send medication to. We have children and young adults who can't access the medicine they need because it is not available. At the moment, just to give you a case, I'm trying to help 5 children who suffer from a rare disease. They used to take a specialized medicine. Then all of a sudden, this medicine was no longer imported, and instead they were being prescribed generics which were not good in their condition. However, their condition, as I mentioned, meant that once they were prescribed a specific medicine, they had to continue on that medicine. And as you might imagine, their parents are desperate and looking for places where they can get this medicine from. And at the moment, I'm buying the medicine for them from another EU member state. And here, this is not a question of price, because the medicine costs only around 10 euros. It is a question of lack of access to the medicine they need. And I'm sure you do understand that this is an untenable situation. Ultimately, all citizens in our union deserve easy and fair access to safe, effective, and high quality medicines. So I am here highlighting 3 main issues that, in my point of view, as you can see in the slide, are the real problem when it comes to access. Because it's true, while there are a multitude of factors that pose barriers to accessing medication in the EU, I believe that most of these factors can be divided into 3 main categories. And the first one is supply and patient access. Medicinal shortages of important drugs prevent people from accessing them. Now, due to the lack of supply, patients might receive alternative treatments that do not work as well and increase the risk of suffering adverse consequences. As I already mentioned, not all member states have the same medications available, especially when it comes to rare diseases and cancers. They often also do not have the same level of medical facilities or healthcare professionals needed to have proper access to treatment. And this is especially true for people in geographically isolated member states or peripheral regions, which often have a hard time to physically access medicinal products and treatments. Now, another major issue, as I mentioned here, is pricing and transparency, because we find that there are often significant differences in prices of the same medicines for different member states. And I can tell you about the cases of people from one member state who go into a neighboring country to buy medicines because in their neighboring country, these medicines are way cheaper than in their home country. And many times this is due to lack of transparency from industry when negotiating prices to ensure fair deals for all countries. It is also due, in my point of view, to the lack of joint procurement mechanisms for medications, such as vaccines or medicinal products. Now, I believe that joint procurement works because it can provide the necessary bargaining power and can often lead to lower and fairer prices. Another important issue to discuss is the fact that we still have treatments that are not being developed because they are not as profitable as others. And people are denied treatment because pharmaceutical companies have little financial interest in actually developing them. This is especially true for rare diseases and more so for pediatric cancers. For me, to have only 9 treatments approved for pediatric cancer from 2006 till today, compared to 150 treatments approved for cancer in adults, is a reality that we need to discuss and seriously address. Then the third point I'm mentioning there is the issue of patenting rules around medication production. Now, in the case of pharmaceutical products, the increasingly demanding regulatory rules for approval for human rights increased costs and reduced the time in which producers were able to recoup costs through sole production and sales. And as well, access to new medicines protected by patent laws generally involves complex negotiations between public payers and innovators. Then you have the issue of supplementary protection certificates, which are an intellectual property right that serve as an extension to a patent right. These certificates obviously were created by EU legislation to offset the loss of patent protection for pharmaceuticals due to the lengthy testing and clinical trials these products require prior to obtaining regulatory marketing approval. In the next slide, I highlight what I deem to be the possible solutions. But I will not go through all of them, but I just wanted to highlight and emphasize in particular 5 different solutions. First and foremost, creating transparency and increasing transparency. I believe that we need to have rules in place that can ensure transparency when prices are negotiated with the industry to ensure fair deals for all patients wherever they are. At the same time, as already mentioned, and I would like to emphasize it yet again, we need to continue working to make joint procurement a reality. Creating transparency, from my point of view, should hold pharmaceutical companies accountable and help member states negotiate fair deals also with the help of joint procurement. Another solution that I would like to highlight from these solutions here is the promotion of measures to stimulate the uptake of generic medicines when this is possible, which in my point of view can effectively lower costs and reduce overall expenditure on medicines. And this would save money in the production of medication that will ultimately directly benefit consumers. More solutions are in the next slide that I will highlight as well. Mainly also the need to have a monitoring system that ensures that national stockpiling initiatives are proportionate to the country's needs and ensure that all countries have fair access to the stockpile and also contingency plans. Now, when the COVID-19 crisis hit, we found that some member states were much better equipped than others because they had strong national stockpiles and the finances to guarantee this. Money should not be a factor in determining which member state has access to medication. And I strongly believe that fair access to stockpiles will ensure that all countries can be prepared for any emergency. We need to also monitor whether patents are granted for genuine innovation and examine also the practice of evergreening, where pharmaceutical companies get patents for inventions that are not actually new, but are old science with minor modifications to existing products in order to keep their patents indefinitely. And the final point that I would like to refer to, it is found in the next slide, is the need to monitor whether patents are granted for genuine innovation, as I mentioned, but also to stimulate competition between generic medicines and established medicines, where the patent has expired. I believe that in this way we can incentivize innovation and also reduce costs. Patents were created to increase innovation, not costs. If they are no longer effective, then we need to navigate the intellectual property system and ensure that it works for our citizens first. Now, these are only some of the issues that I will be working on in the European Parliament through my political group and the Environment Committee, which is also responsible for public health. I have already started promoting the idea of joint procurement for medicines, particularly those needed for rare diseases. The European Parliament at the moment is also discussing a number of reports that go in this direction, because I see from experience that many times children are the ones that suffer the most because of lack of medicines or access to medicines. And as a member of the Special Committee on Cancer, I will be putting the issue of pediatric cancer at the fore. I will continue insisting on more investment in research and innovation of medicines and treatments for pediatric cancer and also for rare diseases. But at the same time, we need to ensure equal access to pediatric cancer treatments, irrespective of the member state a child lives in. We need to make sure that there are more financial resources through Horizon Europe and other EU programs to strengthen support for rare diseases through increased research, clinical trials, the sharing of best practices, and also medication development. Moreover, clinical trials and medication for rare diseases should be made available to all citizens, regardless of the member states. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to share my ideas and my views with you. I will be looking forward to hearing more from different experts.
Thanks a lot, really, Miriam. It was really appreciated, and we really need to create a correct framework of collaboration with the policymakers and with the European Parliament, first of all, to adopt a new paradigm to strengthen chances for pediatric and rare diseases drug development and access to new treatments, and to overcome these huge gaps that cannot be accepted so far. So thanks a lot again. Thank you. And of course, we will have discussion later. So thanks for being with us today. Next speaker now is Luca Sangiorgi. Of course, I'm really happy to introduce Luca. He's the coordinator of the EARN bond. So it is one of the 24 European reference networks dedicated to rare diseases. And of course, is engaged in his department, in his clinic, in the rare skeletal diseases department. So please, Luca, go with your presentation.
Oh, thank you, Donato, for your kind introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I'm really happy, and let's say I would like also to thank you very much, Ms. Daly, since the introduction that she gave is the perfect one for the presentation that I'm going to give now. The first slide is exactly, next slide, please. This is just a brief overview on rare disease. As Donato was mentioning, I'm coordinating one of the ERN that are European Reference Network that are network of center of excellence in treating and managing patients with rare disorders. This network are covering all the diseases, all the group of diseases, and are covering most of the 70,000 conditions. The second point is that the rare diseases are rare, but not so rare. And please consider that around 60 million of people in Europe and North America are affected by rare disorders. So I wouldn't call it a small percentage of population. Most of them have genetic origin, and in most of the cases, rare disease are very similar to a chronic disease since they start at the pediatric age, and then they keep on affecting patient until the end of their life. Sometimes they are also life-threatening, and this is one of the aspects that we should take also into consideration. Next slide will introduce you to the aspect more connected to EPTRI. Most of these disorders are pediatric. The vast majority of them starts in the childhood and become chronic in a way, meaning that patients are continuously affected. And the only way to treat and to manage these patients is a multidisciplinary approach. That means that many healthcare professionals are needed to be involved in the management and care of these patients. Next slide is, let's see, briefly summarizing some of the aspects that are connected to the pediatric research in rare disorder. As you know, and as it is already previously mentioned, one of the main topic is to ensure for the kids high quality, ethically research and authorized properly research. This sometimes in rare disease is not feasible. And this is one of the aspects that has been already been mentioned by the previous speaker that needs to be further explored and further structured currently. Next slide. This is just to give you a brief overview of the aspect connected to pediatric research in rare disorder. First of all, we are still missing in the vast majority of the disorder an approved and available therapy. And this rise up to the point of 94% of the disorders. Very limited number of conditions, around 20% of them have been tested in clinical trial. You need to be very careful when you are proposing a clinical trial to children. And it's not very simple to ensure the benefit for the pharmaceutical progress in the kids. Last but not least, as it has been previously mentioned, developing a new drug in rare disorder has high cost, and sometimes, or quite often, I would say pharma companies are not so willing to invest this amount of money for a limited number of patients. So, next slide. What are the challenges for the rare disease? First, limited population. Second, the dispersion of these patients all around Europe or North America. Sometimes due to physical limitation of this patient, it's not so easy to recruit them in clinical trial. There is a quite wide clinical heterogeneity, and connected to that, for many of these rare disorders, we don't have a good knowledge of the natural history of the disorder. This sometimes leads to another big problem, that is that diagnosis is not so accurate, and so the risk of including patient in a clinical trial without a clear diagnosis is pretty high. Clinical parameter needs to be further validated and tested, and to do this, the ERNs are hardly working in order to try to set up a more validated clinical parameter, but also better classification. For instance, our ERN is actively working with Orphanet in order to set up a clinical parameter and a better classification for the rare bone disorder in order to have better and harmonized data. Those data can be then included in registries, and without this registry, it will not be possible to have what we previously mentioned about the natural history of the disorder, and we cannot explore the clinical variability. Last but not least, and this has been highlighted also in the recent pandemic crisis, many healthcare professionals have a very limited experience in the management of rare disease patients, and only few centers are really, let's say, well structured in order to provide this kind of support for this patient. Next slide. So, what are the highest need that we would like to underline? The first is we need better evidence from the basic and the preclinical research. We need evidence-based clinical practice that can be derived from harmonized database or registry. We need to set up a patient-centered outcome. Currently, most of the outcomes for the clinical trial are designed by healthcare professionals and are not taking into appropriate consideration the patient vision of this. Another limitation could be the limited number of patients and the fact that we need to design study with limited number of patients. But for this aspect, many research initiatives in the rare disorder, like European Joint Project of Rare Disease, are actively working in order to provide this kind of support for those that are willing to run a clinical trial in rare disorder. And this shows the evidence and the needs of the third point in this slide, that are research infrastructure, like a CRAN, but as I was mentioning, like a European Joint Project on Rare Disease, and many other that could support the center that are willing to run research in rare disease in order to have efficient and data on which basing their research. This is the case for the ERNs, or I mean, I'm quoting here the ERN on rare bone disorder, but we have 24 ERN that are actively working and trying to set up clinical guideline, good standard, both at the diagnosis and treatment level, and that are quite active in most of the field. Last but not least, there is still the need of raising public awareness about rare disorder. Next slide, please. So again, what are the needs that are clearly highlighted also recently in a questionnaire that has been run between ERN? We need to have regulatory procedure harmonized at the EU level. Currently, we are still having problem since a clinical trial is accepted in one member state, needs to be accepted and sometimes change in the other member state. And this is really a critical aspect that should be, let's say, discussed, and a solution should be found, I would say, as soon as possible. As the previous speaker was mentioning, we are really pushing in order to find the regulatory and financial incentive for drug development in rare disorder, especially for what is mentioned in the third point, that are innovative drug and therapeutic concept. But I wouldn't forget about also other possibility like repurposing of compounds that seems to be effective in the rare disorder. And also for the repurposing, it's needed to explore and to sponsor this kind of activity. Probably also it's needed to have adequate training for the center that are willing to run clinical trial in order to have a rigorous way to run it. And we need to have, let's say, establish a better procedure for the multi-stakeholder engagement, meaning that currently patient and scientific community are, let's say, not only starting, I would say, are quite efficient in this, but policymaker and industry still needs to be better involved and better structure in this process. Next slide. So the highest challenge for the rare disease is a positive impact on the quality of life. And this is really urgent and needed since we are refining the diagnosis. We are able to find sooner the diagnosis. Please remember that up to a few years ago, to have a diagnosis in a rare disease, sometimes it would take 6-7 years. Now we are shortening this time, but if we want to be able to provide them a good clinical trial or a good treatment, and this patient will not have clearly any increase in their quality of life. Next slide, and I'm very close to the end of my presentation. We are supporting the fact that there is a need for evidence in the basic and clinical research. The reference network could be one of the points in which this kind of new clinical trial can be tested, and this situation can be really achieved by a strong partnership between all the different stakeholders. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll leave you with the last slide with all the indication.
Thanks a lot, Luca. Really impressive, this presentation, and how the clinic's perspective is aiming to have clinical trials available soon in order to make drug available. And this is the last effort of the chain of the drug development, where all we need to go to make new drugs available for rare diseases and for pediatric patients. But now I'm introducing the next speaker, and is the patient perspective now that we can listen. So is really a pleasure for me to introduce Dimitrios Athanasiou. Is a member of the Pediatric Committee at the European Medicine Agency, representing patients, being also a member of the European Patient Forum, with his presentation on the patient-centered research in the rare and pediatric diseases perspective. Thank you, Dimitrios.
Thank you very much, Donato, and I want to thank also the attendees that are here with us, but also the previous speakers, because they made my presentation very easy. And at last, I want to thank Miriam that can advocate for our children in the areas that our children in the policy level do not have a reach. So starting my presentation, if we can move to the next slide. The rare disease and the pediatric development is the science of hope for us. Next slide, please. It includes the best parts of our society, and we are very passionate to work with everybody, also with the policymakers, the regulators, but also the clinical and the research networks to have this achieved. What we can see in the future with the two regulations, so the pediatric and the orphan drug, is that they initiated development in these two categories. So were these, let's say, regulation and this initiative successful? Yes, they were. Next slide, please. But the point is to see how successful. So the three areas that we're really struggling are orphan, pediatric cancer, and neonates. For the orphans, we have really a handful drugs in the market that are not even cures. And in the pace that we are developing these orphan drugs, it will take us a millennium to have cures for our children. For the pediatric cancers, you see that most of the products are adults only, and we have an extended off-label use. And on top of this extended off-label use, we do not monitor the adverse events, and we do not collect this data of the off-label use, which is not helping also the labels for these children. When it comes to neonates, I'm sorry to say, but we know nothing, and we basically have nothing. So these are the three areas of the most and the highest unmet need that we have at this phase. And we have to focus our infrastructure, our finances, our policymakers to merge this environment, to connect the dots on these fragmented initiatives, to create something that will deliver for the children. Next slide, please. But in order to understand a little bit of the environment, I try to high level to points in high level some points that what is the environment that EPTRI and our society is existing at this moment, and which are the challenges that we have to face. So I broke it in 4 pieces. The one is the socioeconomic. So we have an aging population, we have challenging economic environment, that was before the COVID. We have the increased cost of drug development. So the rough estimation at this phase is something like 2.6 billion US dollars for the development of a drug, including the failures and everything else. We have some skepticism of the industry and the government to reinvest in basic science, and this is something that EPTRI should tackle, and all together we should try to tackle. And we also had, at least in the past, drop in the pharmaceutical expenditure. I have to say that due to this tragedy of COVID, we realized that health, that prosperity and economics cannot exist without health in a population. And hopefully we see also a movement from our policymaker and the Commission towards, let's say, putting the priority of health higher in the agenda. In the technical level, we have research and development, low productivity. We have huge underusage of the new technologies, wearables, data platforms, and all the other technologies. And obviously, we have a lot of challenging technologies in the drug development. So, for example, in the gene therapies, although they are very promising ones, we have huge problem in production. So we cannot produce, even if we have cures, we cannot produce enough virus to treat our children and our patients. So this is something that needs a different approach. When it comes also to gene therapies, we have to solve technical issues like redosing and other issues. And I think EPTRI is a part of the solution. And we need EPTRI to be focused also in this. Next slide, please. In the political, where we try to create and, let's say, promote EPTRI, we saw that there is a lot of organizational bureaucracy in the national level, but also in the central level, and we have the natural resistance to change. We also received a lot of, let's say, replies in limitation of mandates, and this comes for many, let's say, authorities, that this is out of my mandate. But in order to solve things, we have to move beyond our space. We have to do the extra mile. And definitely we have the mental, let's say, barriers in our healthcare systems. We have the in silo attitudes of data, because I saw these fantastic presentations before, And if you see point by point, it all comes back to data. So centrally, and as a community and as society, we have to think how we can push data sharing, how we can break the data silos, because without data and without, especially rare disease and pediatric, if we do not share, we get nothing. And lastly, is we experience a tunnel vision of all the stakeholders, including the patients. So we cannot develop the medicines the same way we did 50 years ago. The orphan drug regulation is 20 years old, plus the time that we need to prepare it. The technology and the developments are moving very fast. So we need all these regulations and all our products, let's say, to whichever level, to be flexible, to be adjustable, because the technology is overpassing us. Next slide, please. So the results of the above is what we call the valley of death. The valley of death is when you have a lot of items that can be very useful and very good for the patients, but they never reach to the end. I think that a lot of our speakers present this enough prior, but I would like to show you the next slide, which is how we develop drugs. If you see in the first line is the cost when it comes from the target validation, so the lead science, let's say, preclinical and all the clinical phases. In the second, you'll see the duration, so it takes us more than 10 to 12 years to develop. This is the next one is the probability of attrition, the chances of being successful. And the last one is how many programs you start and with how many programs you finish at the end. This is a very inefficient way of developing drugs. And we will face these problems on and on in the future. If you also combine it with the negative productivity of growth of the industry, which halves every 9 years since 1950, then we definitely look into an environment in the future that the development of drug will be even more and more difficult without even touching the topic of reimbursement, access, and evaluation of drugs. Next slide, please. And what this means, I cannot really separate, although I'm sitting in the pediatric committee, I cannot separate the pediatric with the rare. And I like the previous numbers, but I would like also to share some of these numbers because my son, who is living in Duchenne, is one of them. So 50% of all people affected by a rare disease are children. The 35% of all deaths in the first year are coming from a rare disease. Together, there are more than 8 cancers combined, and 30% of the children will not live to the 5th birthday. When we're talking about chronic, I can tell you that a lot of our children do not get chronic. Next slide, please. So the good thing is that we are not the only ones that we assess that the situation needs more attention. If you see, I took some parts of the Commission report and the commissioners and the MP who was responsible for the pediatric regulation and put it in the slide to see what they feel of how we do develop policy, but how we develop also drugs. From the Commission on the PUMA, the comment was that it was failed to deliver. Also in the Commission report, you see that the major therapeutic advances in orphan failed to materialize, and it is far and beyond the regulation. From the ex-commissioner, he was upset deeply that we were not able to treat the cancers, and that in the next 10 years, we should focus and make possible these treatments. And also from the MEP, who was responsible and rapporteur for the pediatric regulation, you see that she was very stressed of if this ID innovation climate and our old way of thinking will harm the children access to medicine in Europe. Next slide, please. So I don't think it's only us who are concerned, let's say, of the way that we develop drugs at this phase, but there are ways, and I would like to focus on the areas that we can improve. There are various other areas. So obviously, it's not only the scientific and the technical one, there are the political one, advocacy, there are many areas, but I would like to focus in this one. In order for us to move forward, we have to understand where we are in this continuum, which is our position and which is the value we can contribute and maximize the value we can bring to this chain of drug development. Next slide, please. So in the scientific level, we see that there are gaps in the realities we're facing. So in the regulatory, we have a very high need for neonatal pediatric cancer and rare. If you see the success of these drugs in numbers, you can see that I took some numbers before, between 2007 and 2015, we had 150 agreed pediatric investigation plans that had ODD, an indication for rare drugs. From the number completed were 8 of these. The total of authorization of the pediatric indications in this period, it was 9, and plus 6 we had, I think, in 2016. And we had 3 orphan medical products that received a 2-year extension, which is a benefit, let's say, that the regulation is offering out of all of them, and they use the exclusivity period. Next slide, please. So in the scientific level, we have to rethink the existing models we have. We have to develop non-conventional designs. You cannot develop medical products for rare disease and pediatric populations the way we did in the past and the way that we want to, let's say, to do for the adults. Especially in rare disease, if you have, for example, 100 patients globally, because the 90% of the patients with rare disease, the prevalence is 1 in 100,000 or to 1 to 1 million. So it's not like Duchenne that it is a common rare disease, let's say, with 1 to 7,000. We have to involve patients very early in the research because they have to be meaningful, so we don't have failures at the end. We have to develop better protocols, biomarkers, and to qualify these biomarkers. We need alternative to animal models. We need more successful animal models to have more successful products in the pipeline. And we definitely need to use the tools we have for in silico, big data, and artificial intelligence. And we have to start early also with the patient-reported outcomes, patient-reported outcome measures also, and real-world evidence. Also, we have to rethink the way that we use the databases, the data that is there. We have to be ready to share, to open, not to look for publications or siloing data. And we have to be open and verify our data to make it findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Next slide, please. And the technical level, we need common guidelines when it comes to specific diseases. We need these guidelines to be flexible because the speed of technology is much faster than our regulatory speed. We need to use these technologies. We need to look at any type of data. As Lucas said, we miss patient registries, we need disease registries, we miss natural history data, but this data does exist. It exists everywhere. The point is how we can collect it and how we can share it. Because if we have the richness of data, we can develop new drugs. The involvement, as we said, it has to be early. We need new statistical tools because obviously when you are measuring quality of life in 3 patients, or if you want to do the P in 5, the tools we have now, they will not work. And as I said before, for the off-label use, we need a more effective reporting of side effects. Next slide, please. So we need a new blueprint. We need to fast track our development. We need to find ways to cut costs and improve access. We can start very early, involving all the stakeholders. We have to involve also down the stream HTA reimbursement from the beginning. And this was a very successful example in EMA, in the scientific advice and the involvement of also the FDA, so we can have some kind of harmonization, but also include HTA. And we have to look beyond the innovation in technologies. We need to innovate in policy. We need to innovate in access, in the way we measure and we reimburse drugs. And most of all, we have to innovate in our thinking. Next slide, please. And it is feasible. It is feasible. So currently we're working, for example, in a project which is called Share for Rare. Next slide, please. And it's advancing the patient-centric approach. Basically, it's a platform that people can connect, can bring the data, and they can run the research. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. This is from my last slides. But basically, we want to create a sustainable global development model. We have to innovate processes. We have to innovate the thinking process that we want. We have to work together for a common future. And this can only be done in trust. My next slide is the last one. So my call to you is that together with us, that we are one of the kind, we want to have you with us and to make you also. So my call is be one of the kind and join us. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dimitrios, for your exciting presentation, and we will be honored to be part of the solution as you asked for. Of course, the patient perspective is really the one all of us has to follow, but together, as you said, because alone nobody can go nowhere. So now it's really a pleasure. Last presentation for this morning session. I'm just also saying that inviting participants to write their comments, if any. Thanks, Rima, who already did this, because this will shorten also discussion after last presentation. We are a little bit tight on time, but all the presentations were so wonderful that it's fine for us this way. And the last one will be also very, very interesting. It is from Alexandru Costescu. We are working together with Alexandru since 10 years and more. He's following several programs at the European Commission, involved in pediatric research since several years, and he will provide his presentation with an overview on the next Horizon Europe program with specific focus on pediatric developments and prospects. Thank you, Alexandru. The ground is yours.
Thank you, Donato. Thank you for this nice introduction. I must say I was impressed by the wealth of information provided by the previous speaker, so I can say I've learned a lot. Now, I'm going to present Horizon Europe. Well, as Donato has said, we have been working together in the past. As you already know, most of you know, during FP7, we had a dedicated area for off-patent pediatric medicines. And since Horizon 2020, the philosophy has changed, so there was no more dedicated area, but however, it was a bottom-up approach, so there were a large number of calls to which applications for pediatric project could have been made. So now let's start about the presentation. It's a long one, I'm trying to go quite quickly. Next slide, please. Horizon Europe will represent the future frame under which we can discuss EU-funded pediatric research. So I think it's important to know its overall philosophy, main pillars of structure, and various financing possibilities. Next slide. For the next long-term EU budget, 2021-2027, the Commission proposes Horizon Europe, so it's a proposal still, an ambitious 100 billion research and innovation program. This is the figure that has been forwarded by the Commission, and we benefit from the strong support of the Parliament to get even more, but we shall see which are going to be the final figures. So these are still being negotiating these days. Building on the achievement of previous programs, Horizon Europe will boost the scientific, economic, and societal impact of EU funding, and ultimately will lead to increasing the prosperity and well-being of Europeans. Next slide, please. As you all realize, we are at the cusp of a new wave of innovation as a result of the convergence of digital technologies with the physical worlds. These innovations are already transforming our economies and redefining entire industries. And any economy in the world can only stay ahead of the competition if it stays at the frontier of cutting-edge research and innovation. The facts, as you can see from the slides, is that in Europe, the level of business research and development investment is just 1.3% of the gross domestic product, GDP, compared to 1.6% in China, 2% in the United States, 2.6% in Japan, and even more in South Korea. Also, what is a bit worrying is that the EU is home to just 26 so-called unicorn startups, where the United States has 106. I mean, the data are given from 2017, and China 59. Also, regarding financing, the venture capital contribution is too small in Europe. 20% venture capital available in the European Union as compared to the United States. So it's 1/5. Also, 40% of the workforce needs digital upskilling. So all these challenges will have to be tackled, and Horizon Europe will contribute to this. Next slide, please. To address the challenges Europe is currently facing, the Union needs to invest in research and innovation. Union funding research and innovation activities produce demonstrable benefits compared to national and regional research and innovation support. Actions at Union level enable transnational collaboration and worldwide competition to ensure the best proposals are selected. This raises the levels of excellence and provides visibility for leading research innovation. This also supports transnational mobility and attracts the best talents. Next slide. Next slide. Well, even more than 1 year ago, on 19th of March, the institution have reached a common understanding on the proposal for Horizon Europe Framework Program. This was done at the COREPER meeting of the 25th of March for the framework program and also for the specific program. The Parliament also approved the agreement on the plenary on the 17th April 2019. Next slide, please. Now, Horizon Europe is going to build on the success of Horizon 2020. So the aim is that Horizon Europe will keep the three-pillar structure, will be based on excellence, and maintain the tested funding rules and procedures of Horizon 2020. Next slide. The proposed budget of 100 billion, so it's still a proposal by the Commission, should make Horizon Europe the biggest EU research and innovation program ever. It is one of the few parts of the EU budget that the Commission proposes to increase. This increase to the current program is 50% when we take into account the EU of 27 member states. Next slide, please. For each of those key novelties areas, it has been done an impact assessment, which assesses the expected impact, risks, and possible mitigation measures. It has been done a large cluster survey that has fed into the Horizon Europe impact assessment, over 4,000 responses and 300 position papers. And 94% of all the respondents indicated that their responses refer to EU support for research and innovation. So most of the responses are extremely positive about the EU funding for research and innovation. I'm not going into several details to these slides. Please, next slide. The European Innovation Council is going to offer a one-stop shop to high potential innovation. It will be implemented primarily to two instruments, the Pathfinder, implemented mainly through collaborative research, and the Accelerator. The European Innovation Council is focusing mainly on breakthrough and disruptive innovation, targeting especially market-creating innovation, while also supporting all types of innovation. Next slide, please. This is something new. Missions are going to be designed in the context of the strategic planning process. Missions shall have a clear EU added value and contribute to reaching Union priorities. Missions should be bold and inspirational and have wide societal or economic relevance. Missions should indicate a clear direction and be targeted, be measurable and time-bound. They should be centered on ambitious but realistic research. Mission should spark activity across disciplines, sectors, and actors, and be open to multiple bottom-up solutions. 5 missions have been proposed, and we are working on them. These missions concern so the cancer area is the most important for us, the soil health and food, climate neutral and smart cities, healthy oceans, and adaptations to climate changes. These missions are spearheaded by mission boards. There are 15 members in each mission board. And in the cancer mission, we also have an assembly of 26 scientists who contribute to the working of the mission. A first draft of the mission for cancer has been published. Actually, all 5 drafts missions have been published end of June. And in the cancer, I can tell you that there is strong support for pediatric cancer, and this will represent, let's say, a special dedicated area inside the cancer. So pediatric cancer is well acknowledged and well represented by both scientists and patient representative in the cancer mission. Also, what I need to mention is that the mission area will receive separate funding. So don't have to understand that all funding will go into the mission. No, cancer will keep receiving, and pediatric research will receive normal funding under Horizon Europe, and additional funding will be put into these missions, out of which the cancer mission is more important, more relevant for our area. Next slide, please. Well, Horizon Europe will also intensify its openness to the world while safeguarding union interest. It will maintain general opening for international participation, will provide for launching targeted actions of unprecedented scale to pursue strategic international cooperation in line with EU priorities. As in Horizon 2020, international cooperation in Horizon Europe shall be based on common interest and mutual benefit. The program will invite partners from across the world to join EU efforts for tackling global challenges and contributing to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals while ensuring the interest of the Union. Also, the program will extend openness to association of third countries which have good scientific, technical innovation skills, capacity, and will take into account the aim to drive EU economic growth through innovation, and will strive also for reciprocity. Next slide, please. Next, I have just talked about international cooperation. Sorry, next, yes, open science across the program. The principle of open science will become the modus operandi across the whole program. Open access to publications will be, as in Horizon 2020, mandatory. Beneficiaries will be required to ensure that they or authors retain sufficient intellectual property rights to be able to comply with the requirement. Fair and open data is going to be the rule. And further open science practices are planned to be mainstreamed through requirements in work programs as appropriate. For instance, the use of the European Open Science Cloud, the Federation of European Data Infrastructures will become mandatory in certain work programs for the storage and reuse of research data. Next slide, please. Next slide, yes. I'm going to go quickly through this. So innovation starts with excellent research. The first pillar of the program, excellent science, will work with the proposed budget of 25.8 billion. You have moved to the next one, yes. Pillar 2, no, please, before, yeah. The second pillar will focus on global challenges and European industrial competitiveness. Here we have the cluster for health. The proposed budget is around 52.7 billion. Next slide, please. The Pillar 3, Innovative Europe, will help the EU become the front runner in market creating innovation. It is proposed to enjoy a budget of 13.5 billion. Here we are going to find the European Innovation Council, and also the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. Next slide, please. The three pillars are going to be supported by activities to optimize the program's delivery for increased impact within a strengthened European research area. So it will be an increased focus on developing the European research area. is going to reinforce efforts to bring all parts of the EU on the map of excellent research through the Spreading Excellence part of the program. Next slide, please. Well, this is a single investment fund, InvestEU fund, which is going to support the research and innovation activities with a budgetary guarantee amounting to 11.25 billion. And by leveraging this money, the actual investment should go to around 200 billion. These are the figures that have been calculated. Next slide. Next slide. Yes, thank you. Well, taking into account the lessons that have been learned, the annual monitoring of the performance of the program towards its general objectives will be structured according to 9 key impact pathways, so that each impact category will be tracked along several pathways. Next slide. The implementation of Horizon Europe is going to be steered by an inclusive and transparent strategic planning process of the research and innovation activities that the program is going to fund. Next slide will present in more detail. Yes. So here we have the basic scheme for the strategic plan. Horizon Europe, the legislative package, it's still being discussed, so we still don't have a funding amount. Out of this, the strategic plan for 2021-2024 will issue, and we are already working on the work program 2021-2022 with defining the various goals. Thank you. Next slide. Well, next, yeah. Health, has its own importance that does not need to be mentioned again. So everyone has the right to timely access to affordable healthcare and of good quality. This has been mentioned already by the previous speakers in relation to the pediatric patients and the rare disease patients. We need to take into account newly emerging or persisting health challenges, such as threats to citizen and public health, the sustainability of social and healthcare systems, and also the competitiveness of EU health and care industry. Next slide. A few facts and figures on health. So currently the healthcare expenditure of few countries are nearly 10% of the GDP. A large number of deaths can be avoided just addressing environmental factors. Also, infections still account for a large number of deaths. And in some countries, we note that the life expectancy is a bit lower, up to 6 years lower than the average. Also, it's important to note that the healthcare industry in the European Union accounts for 3% of the GDP and a large number, 1.5, even more, of employees. Next slide. Well, in Horizon Europe, there will be, let's say, generally speaking, 6 main areas of intervention: health throughout the life course, environmental and social health determinants, the non-communicable and rare diseases, infectious diseases, tools, technologies, and so on for health and care. And also importance will be given to healthcare system. Next slide. What is new? And here will be the focus on many of the calls during Horizon Europe. So on the one hand, we assist to a digitalization and personalization of health and care across all areas. Also, it's important to ensure that health economics and actually that health systems are able to uptake the results and to achieve impact for the life of the citizens. And also, there is a tendency towards patient-centered solutions and technology for health and care, and also for integrated approaches. Next slide. Here I've tried to put a few figures because there is no much novelty. As you have realized, we are ending Horizon 2020 and preparing for Horizon Europe. So I cannot say much in terms of the call, but just a few statistics data. So in FP7, the figures, it's in the very old slide, you have seen it already. The funding efforts for child health has amounted to 668 million euro for around 141 projects. As you can see, pediatric projects have been scattered along large number of areas. I was in charge of the off-patent pediatric drugs for 21 project and more than 100 million euros. But as you can see, pediatric projects have been funded under a lot of areas. Now, the next slide. This refers to let's say the latest figures, although I suspect they are a little bit inflated because they have been done by a different statistician, and they take into account socio-human project and also projects on gaming, but all of them related to children. So anyhow, the figures for so these are not all pediatric projects. I expect that actually purely pediatric projects are less, but in any case, we have seen a strong increase in the total number of projects funded and also in the total amount that went into pediatric projects. Next slide. I just wanted to stress the fact that in the last years, we have counted for bigger involvement on the side of the Innovative Medicine Initiative, which puts together large private actors in the pharma industry, together with researchers, the European Commission, and also patients groups. So IMI has contributed substantially to advancing pediatric research. Next slide. IMI program in improving clinical trials in children has produced significant results. It's a patient-centric approach. It's a robust city infrastructure, connected data, and quite innovative approaches. I will give a few examples, but they are already now known to you because there are participants from this project among the audience. Next slide. The Connect for Children project is one of which we are very, very proud. It has been issued as a result of the experience that the lessons that we have learned in the off-patent pediatric area. It's a large collaborative network. The budget is more than 140 million euro, out of which the Commission contributes with half of the budget in cash, and the rest of the budget comes in terms of in-kind contribution from the pharma. I'm not going to give more details because, as I said, it has been mentioned several times and it's quite familiar to most of you. Next slide. Here we have the ambitious objectives of the C4C project. Next slide. Another relevant project benefiting for a budget of more than 16 million euro is the ITCC FIFOR project, the Pediatric Preclinical Proof of Concept platform, aiming to address the significant preclinical gap in identifying promising molecules to fight pediatric cancer. It has been mentioned by the previous speakers that there is a so-called valley of death. So there is a long distance from considering several molecules and up to the moment we come with a real product, with a real drug on the market. So this has to be addressed. Next slide. The objectives of the ITCC FIFOR. Next slide, please. Well, here we come to a topic that is very important and to date. As you know, there is a parallel evaluation of the pediatric regulation and the orphan drug regulation. It has been mentioned by the previous speakers as well. Several reports have been issued. Currently, a staff working document is going to be published. Then an impact assessment will be held to assess what sort of changes might be needed, might be recommended for those two important regulations. We should not underestimate their contribution, despite that they did not went up to the expectations, but still important progress has been made. So on the positive side, we can see that the regulation has stimulated the development and availability of medicines for children, has redirected important private and public investment in those areas, has increased substantially the number of clinical trials in which children have been recruited, has reduced the off-label use of medicines, and also we must all acknowledge that the regulation has favored the creation of a pediatric research environment in Europe. Well, on the negative sides, or what can be improved, it has been noted that the development of new medicines for children still remains driven by adults' needs. So it does not necessarily address the highest therapeutics needs of children. We used to have the priority list from the pediatric committee in FP7. We try to take into account it, but the new structure of Horizon 2020 did not really favor this. Now, also on the side of the incentive, the extension of the supplementary protection certificate, the SPC, has partially fulfilled its role. However, we can say that it did not lead to drug development in those situations where the adult formulation was not considered as attractive by the companies, the pharma companies. Also, the other rewards provided by the regulation have been rarely been used, as the PUMA concept, which has not lived up to the expectations. What we need to say when considering the possible changes to the regulation is that any other future solution should aim to find the balance between fostering innovation on the one hand, and on the other hand, as has been already mentioned by the previous speakers, to ensure the availability of and also the access to medicines for children. The last slides give you a list of addresses, electronic addresses, where you can find answers to many of your questions concerning participation to calls, working as experts, or finding collaborators for future applications, so on. Thank you very much. That was my presentation.
Thank you, Alexandru. Really very interesting for everybody, I'm sure, because we are all looking forward to the next years to understand which will be the greater chances to make our dreams reality. And thanks again for all your effort and the collaboration in all these years. I now would like to read some questions and invite any other participants to write in the chat any question. And all the speakers have the microphone on, so they can debate and reply to questions, or even comments between yourselves for the previous presentations, because all of them were very well connected and interesting. So I think that all of you maybe have some questions each other. So please, you can do it. We will take some minutes from the next session, and so we can have a short debate, but any idea is welcome from all of you. While you are thinking, I'm reading a question from Riemann about to Luca. Thank you, Luca. I share many of the points you raised as for our different discussions, but I want to emphasize much one of your points that is around the expertise of the clinicians. We are lacking in research development, rare diseases expertise fields, clinical experts, and the biggest part of the money is going to genomic studies and multiomics, leaving less possibilities to educate and retain clinicians in our European healthcare centers and develop more of them in order to decrease the nomadism of the patients. ERNs are working on this, but a political commitment is needed here too. If you want to reply, Luca.
Fully support what Rima was mentioning, meaning that, and I was trying also, I briefly quoted this aspect in the presentation when I was speaking about training and education of the healthcare professional, and I'm not speaking only of the medical doctor, but also nurses, research nurses, and all the professionals that are working in the healthcare field. It's really a point of, let's say, and also for the clinical trial, we really need some good research nurses to collect the data and to be able to send the data around. So I fully support what Rima was mentioning. I cannot say better what Rima has already expressed. I would like also to add to what Rima was mentioning, the fact that it's really a matter of favoring the exchange of people, meaning for the training and education of these people, it would be good to favor the possibility for these people to have training in those centers. Maybe not only in the member state in which people are living, but also going abroad in different member states. And to favor this training and education will also create a spontaneous network of professionals that will be able to reduce, as Rima was mentioning, the traveling of these patients. And this is a dramatic aspect, meaning that many patients are spending a certain amount of money, in order to be able to be treated in a proper way. Fully support the idea that policymaker should, let's say, be more willing to support these aspects and to support the possibility of a good training and education for the young generation and for all the healthcare providers.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you, Rima. We have no time, but I would like to invite Pirko, Miriam, Dimitrios, Alexandru for a final comment, please go.
This Donato, if I can, I have one question that is both for Pirko and Alexandru. So my question related to the question of the research priority that has been mentioned by Pirko as something where it's difficult to have a role because the decisions are at level of national and European strategy. In the same time, I should say that I'm not very enthusiastic of the next agenda of the European research because I don't see place for supporting pediatric research. And when I say pediatric, I mainly look also at the rare disease research, as Dimitrios explained. So the situation is that currently we have a very, very reduced number of pediatric new medicine, both for pediatric and for pediatric rare disease. This is one point. So my question is why we have to renounce to Article 14 of the pediatric regulation, where there is not an invitation, but an obligation to put money into the framework program of the European Commission exactly to support development of pediatric medicinal product. Clear, Article 14 is dedicated to off-patent drug. Choose is a very limited part. But why we should renounce? This is a question that we have also to discuss at the Parliament level, but I would like to have the opinion of Pirko, if it's possible, to restart the discussion within EMPREMA to resume the priority list. And by Costescu, the question is how the European Commission thinks to respect the indication of the pediatric regulation and to maintain this obligation.
Pirko, please, you want to go first or? Shall I go?
Well, my question might be, thank you very much of this question, and I understand this really important one, but as said, as an imprimer on the European Medicines Agency, it's really challenging and difficult even to do kind of a prioritization for the certain products. What we can do, we can facilitate and try to enhance the discussion. For example, we have a working group for relabeling or labeling the off-label products with using new existing data, what is already available through the academic research and many other research and registries. That is the one way we can enhance the situation, and also driving the discussion for the companies to do more research on these specific areas, but for the priorities it's almost impossible, and because it's on the remit of PDCO more than that. It's well, I cannot say anything on taking back to the priority list, because it goes to the remit of PDCO work more than ours. We can of course enhance the situation and discussion and try to force this topic, but not doing anything special for this list.
Thank you, Pirkko. Alexandru, if you want
Thank
to
you.
add something.
Yes, on my side. So thank you for the question. So I agree that we did not produce the result that were expected, but our efforts should not be underestimated. So we can guarantee the efforts, but not the results. As you know, at the global level, there is a problem with the pipeline of new drugs. So all large companies have this issue that there is a lack of many new drugs on the market. On our side, I think we have respected the recommendation, the obligation in the pediatric regulations, because if you look at the number of the project that we have funded and the total amount of money that has been put in pediatric project, it has been increased. I agree, but that it was not to the level that has been expected, but increasing efforts have been made during all these years. We should not forget the fact, for instance, in rare diseases, that the International Rare Disease Consortium has been set up by the European Commission. And that I think, I don't have exactly the figures, some other people may have them, but I think the Commission has put close to 1 billion euros in the research for rare diseases. And I remember that there has been a target of developing 200 new therapies and diagnostics by 2020 that has been reached much before the deadline. So I think that significant progress has been made, but possibly the results are not so visible. On the other hand, I agree that maybe we need again a sort of priority list. And here it will be possible, I think, because now we are defining the goals. So we are just at the beginning for Horizon Europe, but there is always room for intervention by various stakeholders. So the Commission just proposes the calls, but you can always intervene, and we have monthly interactions with the representative of the member states via the national contact points who comment and propose. And I mean, you are free to contact the national contact points and to insist on these priorities in pediatric drug development. And the Commission will be fully open to this. But we need also, how to say, activity on the stakeholders.
Thank you, Alexandru. Point of view of the European Parliament, I would like Miriam to say some final considerations. Miriam, can you listen? Can you hear?
I think she's muted.
You are muted. No, Miriam, we cannot hear you. The microphone is not working.
Oh.
Dimitrios. Okay, please, Miriam. No, we cannot hear you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thanks a lot. Dimitrios, you would like to say some final words?
Thank you very much. It's mostly a question because all the areas that we discussed also touched on the ERNs. So my question is, do we have any plan, and maybe more to Alejandro, about the sustainability of the ERNs, the expansion, the financial support? What are the views of the other speakers or participants on this?
I cannot say much on this. A colleague of mine was supposed to come. Possibly he was not able to join the discussion on the sustainability of ERNs. We have this on the agenda. We just need to find the right vehicle in Horizon Europe for these ERNs.
And Alexandru, I would also like to ask, you know, a few months ago, before the lockdown, there was a very interesting meeting with stakeholders and also industries aimed to link together pediatric and rare diseases strategies of development. Can you just anticipate if this will be followed also for the future? There will be a strong relationships between the two fields?
I cannot say now, but I would expect so, because as I have already mentioned, the evaluation of the pediatric and orphan drugs regulation are going in parallel. We are going to gather the pediatric, so people involved in pediatric research with people involved in rare diseases. And if changes to the two regulation are going to be proposed, I think they will go in parallel, and we expect also common efforts in these two areas. So I cannot commit. I mean, I cannot speak on behalf of the Commission, but my feeling is that this would be the natural tendency.